Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Scale by Design. Today we are joined by Tony Caraballo. Tony, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. I'm doing all
Yeah,
right myself.
dude, I'm doing great, and I'm so excited to have you here today. I'm really pumped for this conversation. And before we jump into all the exciting topics we want to discuss today, I was hoping you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're currently up to right now.
Yeah, so I am the head of UX at Tenable. Today, I backed into UX from the business analysis route, which is something I love about UX. Many different backgrounds, uh, different entry points and things like that. I've been doing some form of digital design for the better part of 20 years. Got started really early with leading and managing creatives during my time as a record label owner, and working with musicians and artists and things like that. And then moved over to business analysis, competitive intelligence, and moved into product design through B2C as well as cybersecurity companies. So.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And so for everybody listening in too, Tony has a lot of experience working with enterprise as well as startup and growth stage in advisory capacities. So he comes from right now, like it's enterprise cybersecurity, right? So that's
Right.
what you're like for the past several years. That's the space in terms of full-time, not advisory, but in terms of your full-time roles, like it's in that space, right?
Right. The last 7 years spent at FireEye and Andean, and just recently joined Tenable. So that's all in the different sides of the enterprise security space.
Nice, good stuff. So yeah, I guess like to start us off, I would love to talk to you a little bit about how to have repeatable success within the UX product design function, right? Like we want to think about how to operationalize it and how to make it effective at scale for later growth stage organizations as well as for enterprise companies. Could you tell us a little bit about your philosophy and approach to operationalizing product design and really helping organizations get the most out of that function and providing great experiences for customers?
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty straightforward thing, right? It's just plug and play. Let's go. I think that it's a journey. That's my philosophy on it, right? It's just like anything else. You start off kind of not knowing what you're doing wrong, and then kind of like learning what you're doing wrong, but still kind of failing at it anyway. And then you start failing a little less, and then you get you start getting a little bit better, and you start operationalizing that and doing it as a matter of standard operating procedure, right? Like as a matter of practice, right? You're actually just doing the thing well, right? And I think that's just like anything else, right? You go into an enterprise, whether I'm advising or whether it's a company that I'm working full time with, go into an enterprise and see kind of what stage they're at with regard to like the level of UX maturity and product design and product strategy maturity, how teams are working together, and are they doing the things that lead to good experiences, making it out the door and making it into the hands of customers. I think what I find is like a lot of times companies are looking at, are we making the right design decisions, right? Like, are we creating good experiences, and did we come up with the right ideas? And it's, in my opinion, it's less about that. That's kind of like ad hoc. Sometimes you'll have a good idea, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you have a really talented designer, a really talented engineer, or somebody or executive somewhere in some part of your company, and they'll come up with something really great, and sometimes they won't. Other parts of your company won't. And it's less about coming up with the right idea to me, and more about, are you doing the practices? Are you doing the things that typically net good ideas, so that you're just typically net good experiences? So that's just a matter of like clockwork, day in and day out.
So is that like, so, and I think this is important to kind of dive into specifically how to make that happen on like a more tactical level. So can you walk us through kind of the process of, I guess, I don't even know if this is the right place to start, but like collecting like client feedback and having like that feedback loop, and how much that is really determining how you think about UX, or where's like the starting point, right? And then what's that life cycle look like? And then how do you kind of bake that into repeatable process? Can we go through what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, the starting point is always just like sunlight. It's just getting customer feedback, some feedback in some way, shape, or form, so that you as a company, your organization, your leadership, your engineers are getting some kind of exposure. It's just about exposure, basically. They're getting some kind of exposure to what customers are going through, basically, like what pain points they're having, what is it really like to deal with your product and to have your product in their life, like, is, and what do they have to actually go through with, the most important workflows that involve your product, right? So you start conducting, a lot of people start with usability testing. That's a really great place to start. You're watching and observing customers go through a workflow, and it's not a demo, it's not a product demo, you're not telling them about your roadmap or anything like that. You're just literally watching people go through and observing people go through.
So this is live, or is this like a software that's tracking, or like like sitting on the product to analyze, or is this just like Tony with a customer, just like, all right, man, do your thing? Like,
yeah, it's there's a few ways you can do it, right? But the best place to start, in my opinion, is with moderated user testing. So you have somebody like me, or it could be somebody in the organization that wears many hats, somebody that's customer facing, maybe a PM or user, or if you don't have a UX person on staff, just gathering the data and watching them deal with the product and go through a workflow. So you just tell them, like, hey, if I'm a recruiting company, right, and I want to know what it's like for you to fill out an application on my website, right, and I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and try to do that on my website, and observe what you kind of go through to get that job done.
Yeah, because I feel like the reason, and tell me if I'm wrong, the reason the moderated testing or observation is so important is because there can actually be a dialogue that happens. Like, you can understand contextually, like, oh, this is why I'm acting like this, or this is why I'm following the workflow this way, or this is why this annoys me. And it's like, maybe that extra context helps you determine the path you go to fix it, versus if you're just using a software, you're okay, you notice someone's getting stuck here, or this is where somebody's dropping off or whatever, but like, you may not know, okay, well, if you have that context of having that conversation with the customer, then maybe you know how to build it better than if you just have a software kind of scraping or following kind of their workflow, right?
Yeah, I mean, software can't tell you that. A software can tell you. So when you're combining, like, software is good for quantitative research, so you can fall off. You can find out. A software is good for quantitative research, so that you can find out where people are falling off from the workflow, and it will tell you that. It will tell you, like, hey, people are kind of going back and forth between pages, or people are falling off here and leaving your site entirely. They're just giving up, or things like that, or spending too much time or too little time somewhere, right? Based off of what your goals are, right? But you need the moderated testing, and you need that more in-depth testing to find out why. The way that you combine the quantitative and the qualitative research is you do it both ways. You can have the software tell you these starting points and then drill down with moderated testing, because now kind of where to drill down into. Or if you start off with some moderated testing and you start finding out, you're only going to be testing with 4 or 6 users for moderated, right? You don't need more than that. You don't need large numbers of participants for user testing. You might find something that you want to validate, like, hey, is everybody having this problem? Right. And then you'll switch it back over to quantitative, or if you have software, some telemetry software that's going to tell you, now that you know where to look, whether everybody's falling off at that point.
So just so people know out there, like, what is this software called? Like, is there one that you prefer, or that you recommend that does this? Or
no, I mean, I'm not talking about like user testing or specific UX software. I'm just talking about regular, like, telemetry data. Like, you could use Google Analytics,
okay,
this, or like if you're using Amplitude, or something like that. Like, there's a lot of different software that's out there for that.
Okay, cool. And then is there a certain way that you engage with the customer in order to really get their buy-in to do this? Like, is that challenging, or is that pretty straightforward? Like, I mean, how much do you need to like for the people listening in, is this something where there's an actual strategy or process to make sure you can get the buy-in from the customer to do this, or is that pretty easy?
It depends. It depends on your industry, and it depends on your product. So I've done both B2C and B2B. So if you're on the B2C side, typically it's a lot easier. You set up some participant recruitment, and there's usually like an honorarium involved, some kind of fee that you pay people for their time, and your audience is a lot wider, right? So I worked at Geico. The audience for car insurance is anyone from 18 to like 75 or whatever, right? Like it's just, and if you've got a driver's license, we probably want to talk to you, right? And so that's pretty straightforward. You just kind of get people in, and people will, there are panels that there are entire economy or businesses and ecosystems built up around this, right? There are companies out there like user testing, or that have panels available for you of participants and things like that. So there's ways to operationalize that and just kind of automate that a little bit easier. Enterprise design is where participant recruitment gets really difficult sometimes, especially in cybersecurity, because your users are not people who are willing to take a survey for $50, or they are using your product to do their jobs, and their time is valuable, especially depending on who your persona is. So it's a little bit more difficult to build those relationships. It takes more effort to build those relationships with your customers. And in cybersecurity, you have the additional sort of layer of like, yeah, I don't really want you to sit in my SOC and in my security operations center and watch me do my work. I'm doing a lot of stuff that, I'm working with products that are not your products. You're in an industry where, typically people are using many products alongside yours. So
how do you do it? I mean, what's the
so you start by identifying customers that can be friendly to giving you feedback, that are invested in your product, especially with enterprise software. Like once you've got a piece of that, sort of you've established yourself in that line item of the budget, and people are they're using your product to do their jobs. They need you to do well, because if you're not doing well, then they're not able to do your jobs, right? They need your product to work, and it's a lot easier. It's not like B2C where if your app doesn't work, I'll just switch to another app. With enterprise, it's like they're kind of stuck with your product until the contract is up, or it's just a lot heavier lift to switch around. So they do want your product to work. So you identify customers that are willing to give you feedback. Start small, with surveys or with some, short user feedback sessions. And I like to just make sure that I'm keeping a participant repository list of folks that are able to give us feedback, are friendly to give us feedback, and also making sure that it's important to keep track, especially with enterprise software. It's important to keep track of when you contacted them last, and you're not going to be on their calendar every week asking them questions, about the product. So maintaining that list is important.
So do you email them, or is it like through the product, like chat feature? I mean, what does that actual outreach look like? Like, is there a word track you use, or like some type of incentive? Like, I know it's not B2C where you can just say, hey, I'll give you a $50 Amazon gift card. I mean, do you ever do that kind of stuff in enterprise, or is it, is it like part of the onboarding where it's like, hey, now that you've been with us for 60, 90 days, why don't you, it's just like a process check. Like, to me, to be clear, I don't know a whole lot about product design, but what I would think is it would make sense to have that in like the onboarding roadmap, where it's like, okay, 30 days in or 60 days in, you're going to speak with somebody from product design and do a walkthrough of some sort to ensure that, like, and then it's just like a natural introduction. I'm just curious, what does that look like?
Oh, that would be great. That's a great idea. I think that's like, I feel like there are companies that do that. I would consider that pretty high. I would consider that a more mature, operationally mature UX shop or process, right? Like if you're doing that, then you've worked UX now into the standard operating procedure of like bringing customers in, not just the product development process, but the actual customer onboarding, which is awesome. Typically, it just starts off very ad hoc. If you're a UX person in an enterprise company, then you're typically working with the sales sales engineer or salespeople or the account manager, whatever your equivalent of an account manager is, and the product managers. Right. Those are folks that are customer facing. That's typically what I see is like usually the product managers are doing a lot of that heavy lifting on getting customer feedback because they're already customer facing and they're either conducting surveys or things like that. And that's the way that you can kind of start speeding up that process for a more like robust like user testing and things like that. So you would just start off, to answer your question, you'd start off like by emailing them through their account manager or through the PM, and then you start getting better processes like that. Like now you start repeating with the same customers, and you can even have a more like recurring or scheduled user testing sessions and things like that.
Right. Because I oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, like last thing I was gonna say is like then you can get and it usually starts off very ad hoc with emails and things like that, and then you start progressing toward something more like in-app outreach, where it's like if I'm using your product, I might see a little pop-up that we're used to seeing every now and then of like, hey, do you have a few minutes to give us some feedback and that sort of stuff.
And that makes a lot of sense. I don't know why, like, and again, this is from an outside perspective, but I feel like such a huge part of experience happens in onboarding because it's like the first time they're interacting with the product, right? So maybe there's something kind of challenging about the product. Then after a few months, it's like they kind of figure out the workaround or they figure out like, right. But they had to go through that grind of like figuring out that weird quirky thing or how to use this one feature if they go down far enough of a rabbit hole. And then it's like the experience kind of just like starts to break down. So I'm just wondering, like, it would seem to me that bringing UX into the onboarding piece of it, given that UX is user experience, right? Such a big part of the experience is the onboarding. And that is going to potentially, I mean, maybe not with cyber because they like have to use you, right? But like they have to engage with the product. But I feel like with at least some products, it's like if they don't have a good onboarding experience, if they get stuck or if they feel like that part isn't optimized, then that could potentially lead to them not using full features potentially that like the engineering spent all this time building out. Like, yeah. Again, this is from an outsider perspective, but I feel like that would be like a really critical time to ensure that you're getting engagement from new customers and you build that kind of stickiness, right? With the customer relationship.
It's a critical time to get user feedback. But I think like in addition to that, it's smart to get user feedback as part of the standard process for onboarding. On top of that, it would be smart to get, it's really important to get user feedback as a standard process of just any release, right? Because you're releasing new features, regularly to customers who are new to you, who are not new to you, but they're still new to the feature, right? And if you really want to make sure that you're getting, like you said, usage from those things, then from those new features, then that's when you really have to be getting that feedback anyway as well.
Yeah, like so is that feedback to UX, can that actually be baked into the product workflow where it's like they complete the process of a new feature for the first time and like something like pops up like a little chat box and it just says like, tell us about your experience?
They can be. I'm a big fan of that. But I also think that's like you can get feedback from those in-app outreaches, and you'll get some comments, and then you have to think about the fact that it's like at the other side of all of that incoming feedback, right? So you've got all like that data coming in. On the other side of that is analysis. So what are you going to do with that, with those comments and with that information, right? So that's why I say it's goes from different levels of maturity, because if you don't have people on the back end to analyze that, you just end up with like this fire hose of comments that might not mean anything, or you might interpret it wrong. Bad data leads to bad decisions, so you don't want to be in a situation where you're just kind of like anecdotally interpreting everything, right? So yeah, you can get it from those in-app outreaches, but also just building that into the standard. I mean, we talk a lot about UX being building UX into the product development process. I don't really believe that that's the goal. Like, to me, the UX process is the product development process. So you build that in. You have to, you know, do research to discover to discover new opportunities, for opportunity discovery or for problem discovery. You have to define the problem, whether you're just building something or whether it's not just because you're doing UX, quote unquote. It's because you're building something. You have to discover the opportunity and define the problem that you're solving, come up with some solutions to solve that problem, validate those solutions, and then deliver something to the user, and then get feedback on it. So building that into the process itself, not just building it into the product, is my point. But
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like, I think that's a good segue. So we kind of talking about like step by step, like obviously doing the participant recruitment, getting good, people using the product to engage with you, monitored, kind of user testing. I don't know if that's the right phrase exactly, but like doing that motion. And so like, so from there, kind of what happens. And then can you talk to us a little bit about like the interaction between engineering, design, product, like how do those different functions work together? Because I would, I think for late growth stage companies, enterprise companies, I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities for process to break down and for a lot of waste to occur, because, either engineering or product or design can kind of go off and spiral in their own direction without really collectively working with their counterparts to ensure that everybody's aligned toward like the common goal of creating great products and great products experiences that customers need. Right. Yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit about kind of what happens next step, and then how the different functions kind of interact together or should interact together, and where maybe also the most common places where you see that breakdown, right? Where that communication breaks down.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm advising companies and just in general, from what I've seen, process is just process. Process is like tooling, right? Like, tooling isn't going to solve your problems. It's just a mechanism by which you might try to solve problems or, improve your outcomes. But when I talk a lot about operations, what I'm really talking about is it's a lot of it is org design. It's how your teams are positioned to work together. So if I'm going to pull an analogy out of the blue, if you're, on a football team or something, right? Like, it's less about like which plays you're running and more about like, well, do you have, 11 linebackers on the field instead of like, are people positioned correctly to get the results that you want? Jared Spool is a guy who knows a lot about UX, which is an understatement, but he likes to say, you're perfectly optimized for the results you're getting, or I'm going to paraphrase, right? But I truly believe that with regard to organizations. I believe that that's true of life, right? Like, if you want to change the results that you're getting, you have to change the way that you operate.
That is such a sharp statement. I'm like, I want to remember that. I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
You're perfectly optimized for the results you're currently getting.
Yeah. And it's true.
Yeah, it is true. It's 100% true. It's not even like 99% true. Like, that is 100% right.
Yeah. You gotta reconcile that.
Right. You gotta work on that, right? Yeah.
So, that's really what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about operations. It's less like, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about with process and the developer handoff and, agile and, creating wireframes and testing those wireframes or handing those off to developers to start building on, and at what point who does what and things like that. And the truth of the matter is that's all going to break down or sort of gel in different ways depending on the team. But right. Do you have the right players on the field, and do they have the right outcomes and goals in mind? Are they accountable for the right outcomes and things like that? And what I mean by right, I can go into that a little bit, but
yeah, right. And also, like, where does shit usually break down? So, like, where are the areas where you just see the biggest opportunities for catastrophe, where it's just like, it's just the communication breaks down, and then like someone's off like over here to the side doing this thing. Like, how do you make sure that doesn't happen? You said org structure, right? But
yeah.
Can you give us some examples? Not necessarily of like, it could be hypothetical examples, but like, just some examples of where the biggest threats are for things to kind of break down?
I think where things typically break down if is when teams are not working toward the same outcome, when different disciplines are not working toward the same outcome. If UX is not working toward the same outcome as the front end engineering team, and the front end engineering team discipline isn't working toward the same outcome as the back end engineering team, to just use a big oversimplification, and those folks are not working toward the same outcome as PM, then that's where things are going to break down, right? Because people are going to have different goals and different incentives. And that's where I usually see things breaking down. So the best way I think to combat that is big believer in cross-functional teams, right? You want to have, again, the right players on the field, a PM, somebody who's in the product role, somebody who's in the front-end engineering role, back-end engineering role, or APIs, or being able to reach down into the product however far they need to make changes. And of course, obviously somebody in the product design role. And then those folks make up a team. If you don't have cross-functional teams, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to, just bring have a team full of quarterbacks, and I'm going to bring those up against another team,
Right. The cross-functional team I think that's a really interesting concept. So, and I guess it can kind of, I think a lot of this is very situational, right? Like, because when you walk into a new organization too, you kind of have to go with like the org or team structure that you have. And of course you can make some changes, but you got the team you have when you walk your foot in the door. So I think it's like, maybe this is a good segue into thinking about like, I guess 6 months ago ish moved into the head of UX and product design role for Tenable, one of the premier top cybersecurity companies in the country for the enterprise space, incredibly well-known and successful. So arguably you're one of the top UX people in the country. And I want to talk about like that journey, and like what you're walking into an environment, right? Like you're moving up into a head of the UX and product design position. And you have to kind of optimize for the environment that you walk into, and figure out, like, you have to optimize your strategy toward the team you're walking into, and what they do well and what the challenges are. Can you walk us through like what it's been like to move into that head of UX role, and just what your experience has been? Is it what you thought it was going to be? Is it different? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was not exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was a lot better. I was, when you're kind of going up in your career and you're taking on more responsibility, and the main reason for me to take on this was, I was like, I want this level of accountability, and that's what I want to be accountable for. So I was expecting a lot, a really difficult time, because you're essentially just taking on, more responsibility, right? And it does obviously have a lot of challenges and things like that. But I came into an organization that was just incredibly supportive, and incredibly got a lot of support, a lot of latitude, and a lot of ability to make an impact, which is why we do this. But moving into that type of role, as things kind of change, and your responsibilities kind of change, had one of the most important things that I sort of took away from that experience was just setting aside time. Hold on. Sorry. Gonna have a lot of background noise.
Oh, you get the right, always on that Ruston Parkway. It's like every 5 minutes we get like a fire truck going by there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's two of them, so.
Oh yeah, no, it's gonna be at least another minute. Like, we just have to let it like run its course.
I don't know why people just can't get out of the way.
Yeah, just move.
Yeah.
What's that? It's the intersection at the end of the signature with the. It's like, that's always where it goes down.
It's a good time. So no, I was saying, like, yeah. So moving into that role, you have to listen a lot, and you have to figure out. You have to fight the urge to make an impact right away. Especially when you're going into a situation where it's like you were asking about, like, hey, you have to work within the operations and the organization that you kind of come into, right? So you can't just walk into an organization and say, hey, cross-functional teams for everybody. Like, let's go. No, for starters, every team doesn't need to be wouldn't work well as a cross-functional team, right? It's just, if you're trying to deliver product features, then that's really where those teams are most impactful. But yeah, a lot of it is taking in what the organization is doing and working within those parameters to make impacts and make changes and make tweaks as they go along. I haven't found the right balance to that. I feel like, when I started as head of UX, I could have done more listening, to be frank, without try to make too many changes at once. And then also, at the same time, I feel like there were opportunities for me to make more of an impact more quickly. So it's like, you can't get the balance right. You just kind of like learn every time. But
well, yeah. So I think that's easy to say in hindsight, right? Like,
yeah.
because I think the most important part is like, you need to, when you go in, you have to understand why things are being done the way that they are. And sometimes that's because like they're being done in ways they really, maybe it's not optimized for the best outcome, but you still want to try to understand the logic, if there is logic behind how things are actively set up. And you don't want to be the person that just goes in and just says, oh, we should do it this way because this is what I did at the prior company, and kind of do this like copy paste approach, which typically isn't ideal, right? You really have to understand the environment. And then there's also like the buy-in piece, right? Like, you need to establish that trust and that relationship with the teams, particularly when it's cross-functional and you're working with other leaders and even individual contributors that don't report up directly into you. That can be challenging. And I mean, I remember just some of the roles that I, in the earlier days of Secure Vision, when I was building myself out, like walking into those types of environments. And I'll just kind of like be real about it and be open. Like, getting buy-in from people was hard. And there was times where like I walked into environments where people were throwing spears in my back. And I'm just saying that because I want people to know, like, sometimes it is fucking hard. Like, I'm not saying that it's like that for every environment. And hopefully if it's a company with a good culture, that's not going to be the case. Right. But you have to, like, I think the higher up you get to, it's like your ability to pull people along with your plan and get buy-in is critical. And to the extent that people and you move to a company that's like kind of within your network and the people, it can make it a little bit easier. And the more that you don't know the people, sometimes that can make it a little bit harder because you're this unknown quantity and you're coming in and you're making decisions. And sometimes not everybody's on board with the direction you want to take it, right? People get defensive about why they do things. It's easier to justify the way that they're doing things as being the best way to do it than it is to learn and develop and push and go outside of their comfort zone. And so like, I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges moving into a head of role or at a VP position or an executive level function, is just like getting that buy-in. It becomes like half the job is like, how do I get all these people to go along with what I know needs to happen. Right.
Right. And sometimes you don't always know what needs to happen, right?
Right. Good point.
It's like,
yeah,
I run into the same thing with advising, companies. You're right. You can't copy paste. There's not one playbook that works for every circumstance. Every organization is different. Every product is different. And, you don't always have the idea sort of outright, or the right idea sort of outright. I think that it's the same thing, again, just generally in life as well. It's like, try to focus less on the tactical solution or like the thing that you're trying to do, or the thing that you think is right. And I try to focus more on principles, and that's where I kind of like base myself around, because then the actual tactics, the actual tooling that we use, the actual I've seen people go into leadership roles and be like, oh well, we have to use this software to do this or that. It's like, does it follow the principles that you need to do, that you find value in? And I also feel like that helps with pulling people along too, because you can align a lot easier on core principles than on specific tactical solutions or paths or ideas sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think too, and I think it's and from what I've heard on the product side, when you get into like product or engineering leadership, a lot of the times, like, I feel like leaders probably go into the environment like, okay, they've hired me because they want to make a change. And so they
Yeah.
feel this pressure to like, okay, we got to start from scratch, right? Let's
Oh, for
tear it
sure.
down. And that's really not like, we need to be, I feel like leaders in general, not just product, you have to be a little bit more sophisticated in your approach. And, sometimes all you need is like a 1 millimeter shift to the left or to the right to get things going in the direction they need to go in. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not always like a huge overhaul is not always needed. Like um, the best analogy I have is actually one that like Tony Robbins has. He's talking about like golf swings, right? He says a lot of times like the adjustments in order to really, get, I don't know, like the shot. I'm not a sports guy, whatever, to hit the ball in the right direction at the right, place. Like
Sure.
it's like very small shifts and they can make huge differences, right?
Mhm.
So I think that like that's an important thing too for leaders to remember. It's not always about tearing it all down. Like there's, as long if you've had, smart people working on these problems and solutions for years, sometimes we just need like it's just like little shit, like opposed to like a huge bunch of big shifts. It's like, what if we just do like 100 like very small incremental shifts here and there, scattered about, and maybe like together that's going to give us the lift that we need to take, the solution to the next level type of thing, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Abstractly, like intellectually, I think that makes a lot of sense. I can totally understand though, just for like all the leaders out there, it's like that's hard. That can be really hard, especially when you have. I mean, I've been there. I've definitely done it. Like where it's like you're feeling the pressure to make a change, make an impact. You want to like kind of come into an organization and you want to show that they made a good decision, right? Like and sometimes whether I'm advising or there's just so many things that you can see like, hey, all of these things need to change in order to get the results that you want. And you need to feel that sort of feedback of impact when you're going in and somebody's asking you or paying you for your advice or for your expertise and your experience, right? I You can be on different levels on that spectrum. I'm definitely more on the spectrum of like, I feel weird going into a situation like that and being like, well, I don't know. Let's see. Let's test some things out. Let's maybe,
Right.
see how it goes. I like to kind of come in and try to give as much of an impact from my expertise or my experience as I can. But then, like you said, there's definitely a balance there.
For sure, for sure. And Tony, this has been a really fun conversation. We're definitely gonna have to do it again. We'd love to have you on as a regular guest, maybe once a month, once a quarter, something like that, just to talk shop and get your insights and expertise, which are incredibly valuable to the audience. So we are coming up on time, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun, and yeah, thank you for contributing and just being part of this.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, of course. And Nick, thanks for producing and making it happen. And for everybody tuning in, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Cheers.